Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. We're going to wrap up today with a special selection, which is where one of you tell me exactly what track I need to check out. If you have your own song you'd like to submit for special selections, you can find a link to do so in the description below. Today's comes at us from Joshua. It says, A Burning Spear to the Heart of Dawn, Part 1 by Lamp of Mumuur. Glad you had fun with Dawn Vibration, more US black metal, kind of similar to Leviathan. Alright, more black metal. Let's dive into this and see what Lamp of Mumuur is bringing to the table. Hyper compressed but very fun cymbal work. So not only are the drums hyper compressed, but I think our snare is open too, which just makes it that much harder to hear. I really wish I could make out what was going on here with the guitars. I mean, typical, though very impressive endurance all around. Getting those punk drums out. The vocals are something else. I'm gonna have to dig into my hypothesis of how they achieve this. I just hear a bass? I did. Yeah, it's a simple line, but the bass is certainly carrying it. Are they going to keep this going? They certainly get their money's worth out of each riff they write. This is the second riff, I think. Interesting rhythm there with that drum fill. This is a very classic Avenged Sevenfold idea right here in the middle of this black metal track, and I'm really digging it as this switch to metalcore. Yes! The bass coming in with the counter melody. The offbeat hi-hat hits. What is this? Interesting timing going on that ride cymbal. This is also very metalcore. Yeah, this is straight up a breakdown. up a third. Oh, they went down a third. There's the up. Okay. What was this? You heard right there at the end too, when nobody was playing, that little bit of silence. There is so much feedback and static and crackle. The volume, the distortion, the gain is so high on this that there's actually a sound floor of just ambient sounds running through the guitars into the amps. It is wild. While we're on the topic, let's hit the production. That seems to be good. This is incredibly lo-fi, not the lowest fi I've heard, and there are some moments of clarity in the production, but for the most part, the snare, bass kick, vocals, and guitars are beyond compressed, and distorted and fuzzy and whatever else is necessary to just reduce as much of the core timbre as possible and destroy it and give birth to this gnarly sound where the crackling might as well be the core timbre of the note more so than the vocals or the guitar or the crack on the snare when we hit it, when we strike it. It is just incredibly pointed. It's very pulled into the center. It doesn't feel like a very large production at all. There's not a lot of dynamic quality as far as volume or even like EQing. It feels like we're in a very narrow band. And then, like I said, it's also really compressed down as far as the sound sphere goes, and it just feels like everything's right around my head rather than having any sort of space to it all. Everything is right next to each other, right next to the listener. And then, of course, all that destruction that's going on doesn't just introduce fuzz and crackling, it also, at least for me, removes my ability to hear what's going on. I can't make out syllables in the vocals. It just sounds like sounds to me. There's so much of the original recording has been destroyed. Same goes for the guitar work. It's very difficult for me to hear lines. It cleared up a little bit at the end. I don't know if that was just me acclimating to it or if it was the higher range that the guitars were utilizing. But I started to pick up on a little bit riff-wise there at the end, but at the beginning it was just a series of attacks to me. I could subtly hear when notes changed, but I didn't really pick up on melodies. I just kind of knew we went up in pitch and now we're back to where we were, and I think we're riding on a pedal tone here, but I'm not entirely sure. It's a common complaint I have with this lower fi black metal, but I've got to bring it up here again as usual because I don't have a way to speak about the melodic writing as clearly or succinctly as I like because it's just so difficult for me to pierce through the production to hear the music. And if I don't hear the music, I can't talk about it, unfortunately. I did pick up on a lot of tremolo picking though, so it's very possible that a lot of this was just writing out pedal tones with occasional licks at the end of a phrase to punctuate the idea. This also extends to the drumming, at least primarily the snare and bass kick. I didn't hear any toms. It's possible they were there, but given just how muffled and pushed down into the mix the bass kick and snare were. The tom might have been just impossible to hear amongst all of it. The snare was also turned off, so we don't get the rattling, the signature snare sound. We just get a very hollow hit, much like a tom, but higher pitched. And that's just because they release the tension on the strings of beads underneath the drum, so they don't rattle against the bottom drum head. Um, if they're tight, they would rattle against it, but they make the strings slack, so they hang beneath it and they don't rattle against it. You don't get that rattling sound. So we get this very hollow thunk kind of sound on our snare, but again, it's so compressed, it's so pushed into the mix, it's EQ'd in a way that it just lacks punch, and it just comes off of this hollow thud every once in a while that gets so easily covered up by the rest of the mix. The bass kicks punch through a little bit more, it's easier for me to hear them, but again, they're still not as dominant as my ear would expect them to be. And all in all, aside from the bass guitar and the hi-hat, I have to say the production on this feels antagonistic. It feels like it doesn't want to be heard. It feels like it would rather be an enigma. Figure me out if you can, but I'm not going to give you any handouts to do so kind of vibe. And I've never really made this connection before, but it's kind of like uh, being an edgy teen, and I'm going to say this from firsthand experience, thinking that you're deeper than you are and doing so through obfuscation by just not presenting who you are and trying to make it into a puzzle. It makes it difficult for people to connect with you, but honestly, there isn't there isn't a lot of complexity to you. You just kind of hide it. You don't give out any hints or anything. So it makes you seem more mysterious, even though you're just another regular kid. That's kind of what it feels like. Figure me out if you can. Ah, man. Again, I don't want that to seem like a negative towards edgy teens or lo-fi black metal. I kind of made that connection. And like I said, I'm taking a little jab at myself as well because I was 100% that when I was like 16, 17, 18. Yeah. So, uh, but yeah, just a very antagonistic production style. I want to know what's going on. I'd love to hear the riffs themselves. The production just doesn't allow that to happen. However, the producer does feel there are some important aspects that need to cut through the fuzz and the distortion and the muddiness, and for some reason, it isn't consistent. I figured it would be a higher range, so when our guitars play higher, they would be a bit more clear. Our cymbal at the beginning, both the hi-hat and the ride cymbal, both cut through the noise. And I'm like, okay, maybe it's a higher range thing. But the guitars didn't really do that. And I was quite surprised when I found the other instrument other than our opening cymbals to cut through this was the bass guitar, which is just one, black metal doesn't have bass guitars. I say that tongue in cheek, of course. I hope you guys know I'm joking. We've listened to a lot of modern black metal with bass guitar, but a lot of older black metal stuff, just because metal, and especially in the 90s, didn't really care about the bass. From my limited experience, it just seemed to always get buried under the guitars. I don't expect the bass when I listen to black metal, and it was a neat surprise to hear it, especially providing both counter melody and counter harmony. Um, but it also had some moving ideas. It's just a very neat thing. It was very sparsely used. I think there were three whole ideas I could name that are like, oh, that's the bass guitar doing something interesting. So three ideas out of an 11-minute song is not super great, but it's better than I expected. So yeah, it's just very weird that the bass and the cymbals cut through the production and nothing else does. I don't know. Um, riffs. Riffs. This is just a song that is a series of riffs. I counted one callback. I'm going to attribute that to me just not being able to hear the music itself, and we probably did have quite a few callbacks to older ideas. I can't imagine they had 11 minutes of new riff after new riff after new riff. However, they certainly get their money's worth out of each riff as they retain it for ever, it seems like. I don't know if it's because I couldn't hear it, or maybe because what I could hear made them sound like, simpler riffs, which is not uncommon for black metal or thrash metal. Um, but it feels like each riff lasted 2 or 3 minutes each. In fact, the one that I picked up on, I had specifically said, are they going to continue with this? To me, it was a transition riff, and it should have been slightly modified to move into a core riff, something that would carry a section rather than help transition from one idea to the next. And they just kept going with it. And I don't really think it worked well in the next section. It was okay, but like I said, it really needs a small modification to give it the extra impact, the extra carrying ability to lift the section through. It's a good transition idea, not a good lead idea. Um, but yeah, they would bring up a riff and run it for like a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes maybe even, and certainly get their money's worth out of each riff. They really stick with them for a long time. It is interesting though just how many they throw in here too though. This album is only, well, I guess technically it's 2 tracks. It is a demo. There is this one, which is 11, and then a 10.5 minute part 2 to this, and then 2 interludes. Actually both of them, about 1.5 minutes each. So yeah, it's really just these 2 parts with some small interludes around them. Yeah, so looking at a 25-minute-ish album, and just assuming that this next track, part 2 of this, is like this, we're looking at a ton of riffs put it into just a little under half an hour. If you are the type of person who's into that rule of cool metal, it doesn't need to be musically sound, it just needs to sound cool to listen to. You like those really gritty textual riffs. I think this is certainly a band that would work for you. Even more interesting, I think, is that there's so much variety, riff-wise, in a black metal band. I tend to associate black metal with more simplicity, which I'm being pushed out of that. We've checked out a lot of avant-garde and progressive black metal. We've looked at Blackened, other stuff. So I'm slowly getting out of there, but I guess just due to my introduction, I still kind of have that that initial idea that it's a bit simpler music. So I don't know. Just to me, it was really interesting to hear so much variety in the riffage going on. Um, Two more things, and we'll get into the outro here. Vocal production. I just want to take a stab at this because the vocals are interesting in that they're hyper compressed, but there's also a very specific quality to them that I recognize from me trying to make music in Audacity a decade ago with like phone microphones. So there's this very specific thing that happens when you don't have good recording hardware or good recording environment for acoustic recording when you try to remove the noise floor, usually with a noise remover, and it removes some of the granularity of the vocal work or the acoustic instrument work, whatever you're recording, and you typically get what is colloquially referred to as the toilet bowl sound. It is a very specific alteration to vocals, and I don't think it is I don't think it is a perfect analogy as far as like, sometimes when you hear a phrase, you're like, oh, that makes perfect sense. I can already hear it, and I don't even know specifically what you're talking about yet. The toilet bowl effect, I think, is like mostly a good descriptor, but I think it's a little off. But I think if you ever hear it, and I wish I just had like, I could just YouTube toilet bowl vocals and just show you guys a little snippet, but I'm sure they're not too hard to find if you are curious about it. But it typically happens when you try to remove a noise floor and it ends up taking apart some of the core aspect of the original recording as well. I believe they did growls then pushed in this toilet bowl sound, possibly through noise removal, and then compressed that and maybe put it through a drive pedal as well to get this specific sound. It is bonkers how bad the vocals sound, but how well they fit with the music there within. Like, if someone were just to present me the vocals as they were in isolation, I'd probably tell them that's terrible. And I don't think that is wrong. I mean, objectively, I think in most genres it would be terrible vocal production. But as I've always said, everything is a tool in the composer's toolbox, or in this case, the producer's toolbox, and you really are looking for mixing ideas for a specific effect rather than following rules. Music is not about rules. So here we get some terribly produced vocals that in this specific case work very well. It just sort of lines up with everything else the music is doing. Do I wish they were clearer? Yes, 100%. I wish the production was clearer and possibly maybe even the enunciation, but I honestly don't know. I couldn't really hear any of the enunciation in this specific production. But does it fit what they're doing? Does it elevate the work as it is? I'm going to have to say yes. I think that this could work with a cleaner production on the vocals, but I don't think that the production detracts from the art. And that is really the big takeaway when talking about whether something is good or bad. It's not an objective idea, but it's a subjective idea about how it works within a piece. If you're trying to make a Bob Ross style picture of an environment and you start just flinging paint on it, it's going to look bad. But if you're doing abstract art, that's exactly what you want. You want to just start flinging paint. And that's what's happening here. We're taking a production technique that isn't typically beneficial for a work and putting it in a work where it actually can flourish and add to the work itself. So, Alex, I just want to take a quick stab at that. And then finally, we gotta talk about the metalcore. Did we shift? Okay, so I've always said Blackened is more of a descriptor. Black metal to me is blackened thrash, typically with satanic imagery. And I guess if I keep adding with this and with this, it's easier to say black metal. But Blackened to me is more of a production idea, not a compositional one. And I think it's really interesting here that we shifted from traditional black metal ideas into what to my ears sounded like traditional 2000s metalcore ideas. And it was a very stark shift that really brought me around, and I wish the whole song were like that. Granted, I would probably prefer to just listen to metalcore because I prefer the cleaner production of metalcore. But it was really interesting to hear Blackened metalcore, and I think it just really worked here, at least to bring me around. Everything up to like the 8-minute point was pretty typical black metal styles, especially when you look at lo-fi black metal. Lots of riffs, but other than the riff variety, it's a lot of tremolo picking and double bass kick and blast beats and yelling. But at this point, we shifted to something that was more melodic and groovier. That's not to say that the riffs prior weren't melodic, but they lacked a poppiness, a catchiness, I would say, almost. It's just catchy black metal. Who would have thought? And it just comes off so good. Like, I would not be upset if more of the song were like the outro, or if they peppered it in where we alternated between more core Blackened ideas and this metalcore writing, and we kind of went back and forth on them to provide contrast, rather than to front load all the black metal in the first 70% and then drop us into the fun metalcore stuff at the end. But we actually had like 2 or 3 riffs there, and they all just kind of fit, ending in a very typical 2000s metalcore breakdown. And like I said, the guitar lines themselves, the rising thirds, resetting, falling third, resetting kind of idea, It just harkened me back to early 2000s Avenged Sevenfold, Waking the Fallen era kind of stuff. It's just, which is probably my favorite Avenged Sevenfold album, just to lay that out there. So the fact that it reminded me of that is a solid positive in my books. Um, and we got some dancey drumming. We shifted to offbeat cymbal work, starting with the hi-hat and then moving to the ride cymbal. Um, it was just a very bizarre shift that woke me up. I don't know how bored I looked throughout the first half of the song. I try not to look bored when songs sort of bounce off of me. Um, I promise you that I am still paying attention. I still have things that I'm looking out for. I'm just less physically involved. It's more of a mental involvement at that point. But when a song clicks with me too, I'm critically listening while physically engaging as well. And that's what the end did. It kind of woke up the physical aspect, and it went from a song that bounced off of me to something I could groove with. I am kind of tempted just because I've already listened to half the album at this point. Might as well check out part two and the two interludes and see what else they do with this Blackened metalcore idea. Yeah, it's kind of bizarre. Oh, the very last thing I want to talk about though, I thought I picked up on some timing things throughout the song, but it was almost like a blink and you miss it kind of thing. Oh, was that really off, or did I just miss it? Was I paying attention to the wrong thing and I just came in an awkward position? But like 7 minutes in, there was a drum fill that felt really weird against the guitar riff. And then when we hit the offbeat ride cymbal work, it was very off, consistently off, where it was just ahead and then just behind. I don't know if the drummer was getting fatigued. I know this is a demo. This is not an EP. This is a demo. So it could be that this, if they chose to redo this, maybe it would have more polish put on the performance, maybe cleaned up in post, maybe just re-recorded. But yeah, the ride cymbal work gets really out of time there. And I don't know if that was purposeful because we didn't hear it anywhere else, and this is honestly one of the easier parts, or if the drummer just feels much closer to home playing 16th notes than offbeat eighth notes. Basically quarter notes at that rhythm. It's every beat. It's just every other beat or every off beat between the beats. Um, yeah, it was really awkward. It made me rethink. I was like, maybe some of those other times I did hear some inconsistencies, but like I just mentioned, it is a demo. It's designed to get the ideas down on paper. They don't necessarily have to be perfect. They can always get cleaned up for a more traditional release. I looked for lyrics. I don't even know if there were words in here, but I could not find lyrics. I looked in quite a few places. I even did a general internet search. Um, I checked out dark lyrics, I think is what it was, which is the last time I had a metal song I couldn't figure it out. Someone linked me to that place, so I kind of added that to uh, my repertoire. Could not find it there either. So I can't really do a lyrical breakdown, but yeah, I mean I'm sorry, it's a black metal track. You guys know how I feel about that. It's lo-fi. You guys know how I feel about that. It does have some really fun ideas though, and it makes me intrigued to check out more from them, which is honestly the best you can get when we're talking about lo-fi black metal is an intrigue into what else they might do. Very rarely are you going to give me a lo-fi black metal, and I'm eagerly looking to listen to more on the sheer fact that I want to hear more of it. I'm more curious about what they're going to be doing. So those are my thoughts on Lamp of Murmurs, The Burning Spears of Crimson. No, that's the album. No. Yes, that is the album. The song is A Burning Spear to the Heart of Dawn, Part 1. This is where you guys come in. Hit me up in the comments. Let me know if you enjoyed this or not, anything that stood out to you, anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on. Let me know. Above the comment section is a description box. In there is a link for Linktree, which will take you to this menu right here. Has links for everything related to the channel. You can pick up some merch, follow me on Twitter, join Discord, support the channel through Patreon, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. Thanks everybody. Also, just anybody who's still here is probably, I don't know. Thanks for the patience all week. I still have this residual cough from COVID. I tested negative, but I've heard I'm just gonna have this cough for a few weeks, and it probably looks dumb, and I hate that it's in the videos. Very self-conscious about it, and I try to suppress it when I can, but thanks for everyone's patience with my recovery still, which is so dumb. It's been 9 days and I'm still recovering. 10 days. Ah. Anyways, that wraps it up for today. Be back tomorrow, 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC. As usual, we're going to finish up this week's theme of Gotta Go Slow and check out a creator's request. So until next time, remember to be critical but not cynical of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.